The title of my talk, for those that like titles, is Putting It All Together. And basically it's the story of how God brought me through my life to where I am today. I love maps. Growing up, I collected maps of the area where I lived. They were really detailed maps, 1/4 of an inch to every mile, so I could really see the details on them. And then when I'd looked at the maps, I'd go out on my bike or laid in my car and explore the area. And I'd plot where I was going to go and I'd have a fun day. Well, a bit later on when I was in college, I got teamed up with the local car club. They went on a treasure hunt. I was the navigator. The driver had no clue where we were going, where we were heading, where the finish line was. So I had to navigate him from point A to B to C to D. And of course there were checkpoints along the way that you had to register. And they had hidden checkpoints to make sure you didn't take shortcuts to get there first. So this guy was totally dependent upon me for his direction that night. We won, by the way. When God came into my life, he took all the maps away. He became my GPS. I had no idea where I was or where I was going, what road I would turn on next. Just like it is when you're in the car with the GPS and it says, 500 meters, turn left. God started directing my life without me having a clue where he was going to take me or where the final destination was. So, for me, it was a mystery tour. But God was putting it all together for me. He just put me where I needed to be when I needed to be there. So to go back to the beginning, I was born in England during the Second World War. I was too young to remember anything about it. The only thing I can recall is that we had rationing until 1956, which was 11 years after the war finished. Chocolate, oranges, meat, everything was rationed, really hard to get hold of. I grew up in a small town called Arundel. There were about 3,000 people lived there. And there were 2 elementary schools in the town. One was the Catholic and the other was the Anglican. I went to the Anglican school and every morning we'd have an assembly, we'd sing hymns, read scriptures and pray. And that was basically my only information on Christianity. I'd asked my father, because my parents never went to church, and I asked my dad, why don't you ever take me to church? And he said, well, I want you to make up your own mind about religion without being influenced. And I thought, how can I make up my mind if I've got no information? When I was in my early teens, my mother had a severe stroke. She became completely paralysed down one side. She couldn't talk. And she became incontinent. So my father retired to look after her. And then when I get home from school, I'd help out looking after her. I learned to cook meals and do housework at a pretty early age, because there was just the 2 of us to take care of everything. But from my brief exposure to Christianity when I was in elementary school, I thought, I need to go to the local church so that I can get some prayers for my mother's healing. So the next Sunday, I walked up the hill. I don't know why, but both churches in town, the Catholic and the Anglican, were way at the top of a big steep hill. Anyway, I walked up to the hill to the Anglican church, and unfortunately, it wasn't really what I was looking for. All I found was a building full of ritual. There was no life. There was nothing to encourage me. There was no help to be found. I tried it a few times later, but I didn't get anywhere. There was just nothing for me there. So I pretty much gave up on religion for a good many years. I graduated high school at 18 and worked in various jobs in the electronics industry. And it was while working for the British government in air traffic control maintaining computer systems, that I was given the opportunity to come to America to learn about a new system they were buying from IBM. There were 4 men, 2 of them were married, so there were 6 of us in total that came over to the States, because the guys brought their wives with them. We left London on a cold, wet August morning, and we arrived in Oklahoma City at about 8 o'clock at night, and it was 90 degrees, and we were like, wow, what is this? So we're waiting in the airport because we were told we'd been met and taken to our hotel for the night. And this guy showed up. He was dressed in a white suit with a white belt and white shoes, and we went, what on earth is this? But he was the rep from the Federal Aviation Authority who'd come to meet us and take us to the hotel. Now remember, in England, all the cars are small because gas was real expensive. So this guy says, okay, follow me, and we walk out front of the airport, and he puts himself, 6 passengers, and all our luggage in one station wagon. And we went, woo, cars are big over here. Anyway, he took us to the hotel. The next day, we had some serious planning to do, because we were going to be there for 46 weeks for this training class. So we had to find a car to rent and find somewhere to live. So they'd given us a few addresses. We went up, we found a very nice apartment complex. So we rented 3 apartments that married people had their own, and myself and the other bachelor just shared a 2-bedroom apartment. It was weird. I mean, we spoke the same language, English, but we didn't understand each other for the first several weeks. I didn't know it, but God was working in my life at that time. Psalm 48:14 says, for that is what God is like. He is our God forever and ever, and he will guide us until we die. God had given me an interest in electronics when I was in high school. It was so much of an interest that I actually got a job repairing radio and TV sets when I got out of school. And that's where I learned all the basic skills of electronics that have seen me through the rest of my life.
I'll be right back.
But my older brother recognised that I was in a dead-end job, I wasn't going anywhere, and he clipped a vacancy notice from a London newspaper and mailed it to me for jobs in air traffic control. So I applied, passed the test, got the job, and worked for air traffic control up at Heathrow Airport in London for a few months. So God brought me to America. Not that I was aware of it. When I was working for air traffic control, as I said, they bought this American computer system and they needed some people who had a little background in computers. Remember, this was way back in the 70s. Computers were not around. There were big rooms full of equipment. There was no laptops, no PCs, nothing like that. So anyway, the training it was down in Oklahoma City at the Federal Aviation Authority's training centre there. And the training started in September, and there were so many people training that sometimes we worked first shift and sometimes we worked second shift. We had one car between 6 of us. The wives stayed at home all day because they couldn't go anywhere. And we drove the car to work, and then we came home in the evenings. But now, really thought this was strange. In Oklahoma City, of all places, there was an English Appreciation Society. And once they heard there were some English people, well, one of them was Scottish, but once they heard we were there, they wanted to meet us. So we got invited to their meetings, they took us out for dinner, they wanted to go to the theatre, they just wanted to do stuff with the English people. Well, myself and the other bachelor weren't too interested, but the married couples enjoyed it. So anyway, at one of the meetings, the leader of our group, Graham, met an English exchange student who was babysitting for the couple they were going out with that night. And Lucy played the guitar. So the next day, Graham told Laurie, the guy I was sharing the apartment with, who was learning to play bass guitar, hey, you need to call this girl. Maybe you guys could practice together or something. Little matchmaking, I don't know. But so anyway, we were working second shift that December. So on our evening break, Laurie called Lucy and chatted to her. This continued every night through December until Lucy went on Christmas break with one of the other college students. January, girls get back to college. Laurie starts calling Lucy every night. They'd never met each other, just talked on the phone for half an hour a night. Graham and his wife Betty thought, we need to do something about this. So they organised that we'd all go bowling one Saturday evening. And they said, hey Laurie, tell Lucy we're going bowling, invite her along, tell her to bring any of her friends from college and we'll have a fun evening. So Laurie told Lucy this. What he neglected to tell her was how many of us there were, whether we were married or single, how old we were. She knew nothing about us. So she invited some friends. Talk about a blind date for the ladies. They had no clue what was going. Anyway, in January also we had some more English people come over for training. So now there was quite a bunch of us there. And Laurie and I had both bought ourselves used cars so we could get about, no sharing with all these married people. So Laurie and I drove up to the college to pick the girls up. So we're sitting in the sort of waiting area, the reception area of the dormitory, because they had these big doors that said nobody through. So we're sitting there and we didn't know who the girls was. Well, then I heard Lucy talking to the other girls saying, where are these guys? Who are we looking for? And I recognised her Yorkshire accent, so I went over and talked to her. We made the connection. So there were three girls, put them in the back of the car, Laurie and I sat in the front, and off we went to the bowling alley. Now we'd only booked one lane, and there was probably about 8 or 10 of us there. So there was a lot of time to talk between your turn to bowl. After we'd finished bowling, we all went back to Graham and Betty's apartment for some refreshment and just to socialise. I was sitting on the floor because there weren't enough chairs, and I was really attracted to one of the young ladies sitting on the settee. She said afterwards that she could feel these eyes burning into her. Okay. So anyway, after we had our snacks, etc., Laurie and I put the girls in the back of the car and we got in the front. We drove them back to their dormitory. And I really wanted to talk to one of these girls. So I got out quickly, but she got out before I could, and I had to chase after her to catch her. I had some tickets for an athletic event the following evening at the Oklahoma Fairground, and I wanted to invite this rather pretty-looking young lady to accompany me. I had no idea where it would go. Fortunately, she said yes. So the next evening, we went to Oklahoma Fairground, and the seats were so far up that you needed binoculars to see what was going on. Okay. So we just sat there and we talked. Now, I knew that Susan was a believer. Well, she was, after all, going to the Bethany Nazarene College, so she had to be, right? We talked about lots of different things, but being a smart aleck, I said to her, I hear the Bible's full of contradictions. Name one, she said. Amazingly, I could think of a passage in the New Testament which I mentioned to her. So she opened up her bag, she got out her little black book, and she turned to that particular passage, and she read it out loud to me, and then she explained it to me, and I felt so foolish because, well, I said, okay, put your little black book away. We saw each other a few times after that, but she told me that she was very busy with work and college and really didn't have time to go out with me. She also knew that I had a girlfriend back in England, because I write this girl regularly. In fact, my letters ended up being a journal of my stay in Oklahoma. And of course the girl in England knew all about Susan, because she was in all the letters I wrote. Talk about being really open with the ladies. That's the way to get yourself into trouble. So one day, Susan was all set to break up with me. Unfortunately, that was the same day I got a Dear John letter from the girl in England. Susan felt so bad for me that she decided to postpone that a few more days, and I'm really glad that she did. Susan invited me to go to church with her, but I declined. I said I'd rather sleep in on a Sunday morning. She didn't badger me, but I'm sure she prayed for me. In the end, I decided to go to church just to spend some time with her. And besides that, I really enjoyed her singing. The church that Susan attended on Sunday evenings was a Southern Baptist church. Not that that meant anything to me. The first time I went there was a ministerial student preaching an assigned message, and the topic was sex before marriage. That poor guy, he was so embarrassed, and I think most of the congregation were as well. But anyway, I continued to go on a Sunday night with Susan, and I gradually began to learn about God. Notice, about God. But I didn't have a personal knowledge of him, and I didn't have a relationship with him. But that was about to change. In March of that year, Susan and I decided to drive up to her parents in Ohio during the spring break. I really wanted to see Niagara Falls, which is not too far from Elyria in Ohio. We left late in the afternoon and intended to drive through the night. But when we got to the show-me state of Missouri, it started snowing. So we pulled off at a diner and we figured we'll just sleep in the parking lot till the weather improves. It was too cold for that, so we went into Stuckey's and we had dinner and we hung about, and finally daylight came and the snow had stopped and we got back on the road. So we were on I-70 between St. Louis and Indianapolis, and the road was covered in snow, and I was still a smart aleck. And I said to Susan, hey, let me explain to you how to get out of a slide or a skid if you get into one. So I told her all about it. I'm sure she already knew anyway. But I told her all about it, and then the car drifted off of the road onto the hard shoulder, and it was like a little dip, half an inch to an inch between the two. As I steer back onto the road, the car spins out. We were doing about 60 miles an hour. We're spinning round and round and going backwards. There is no way I can do anything about this. Susan reached over to the back seat, grabbed her Bible, and started reading Psalm 91 out loud to us. The car comes to a stop on the hard shoulder or the grass verge by the fast lane of the interstate, right next to this big, deep ravine that separated the north and southbound carriageways. Engine was stalled, no damage done. I restarted the engine, pulled the car slowly and carefully back onto the highway, and we started on our way again. And that was the first time I saw any other traffic on that road. There was a truck way back behind us, just came into view. The whole incident happened with no other vehicles anywhere around. Like I said, there's no way that I was in control of that vehicle. And I told that to Susan, and she said, when we get home, we're going to praise and thank God for bringing us safely through this journey. So anyway, a bit later on, Susan was driving. We were quite close to her parents' home by this time in Elyria on a country road. and a guy pulls out of a farm lane right in front of Susan. She had to swerve left real quick to get past him. And as she gets into the left-hand lane of the road, there's a car coming straight for her, so she had to swing back into her own lane real quick. And the road was icy, but again, the Lord protected us. We didn't skid, and we got home, and, well, we were sweating, even though it was freezing cold. And we did, praise the Lord. Thank you. We never did get to Niagara Falls. Back in Oklahoma after the break, I continued to go to church with Susan on Sunday evenings. Now my relationship with God was stronger. Easter was late that year. It was actually in April on the 22nd. And listening to the Easter message for the first time, I was overcome with emotion. As the story of the crucifixion unfolded, I felt tears running down my cheeks. I thought, if this man was willing to suffer the way he did and to be crucified on a cross so that I could be forgiven my sins and have the rest of my life and all eternity with God, I've got to do something about that. I really do. So I thought, I've got to give my life to God and serve him and follow him wherever he leads. A little before this time, Susan had gone over the 4 spiritual laws with me. So on Easter Sunday, I made a public declaration of my faith in that Southern Baptist church. And when the altar call came at the end of the service, I went up. And a few weeks later, along with lots of others, I was baptised in their pool.
Amen.
Susan bought me a Bible, and my journey with God started. I first met Susan at the end of January, and after I accepted Jesus as Lord, my relationship with Susan blossomed. About 3 to 4 months after first meeting her, I asked her to marry me. She said yes! Maybe she wasn't that enthusiastic. Now, since I was supposed to complete my training in July and fly back to England, because remember I was still working for the British government, we had to plan this wedding pretty quickly. So we made all the arrangements and set the day for August the 4th at Susan's home church in Elyria, Ohio. The same day, as it happens, that Lucy and Laurie were tying the knot back in England. And we had to move our wedding to August the 11th because the minister decided to go to a conference on the 4th and we had no one to do the service for us. After we'd had all the invitations printed, the napkins, everything was set up. Oh, well, what are you going to do? Due to delivery delays of the new computer system, there was nothing for us to do back in England, so we were told to stay in the States until probably December and work with the FAA at various locations around North America to get experience on fixing this thing. So, fortunately, 10 or so miles from where Susan's parents lived was an air traffic control centre that I was assigned to. So was Laurie, as it happened. So we rented an apartment in Elyria, and Laurie and Lucy flew back to the States and rented an apartment in the same complex, and we worked in Oberlin for pretty much through the beginning of December till we went back to England. So, in December, we fly back to England, and it's cold and miserable. It's always cold and miserable, it seems to me, in England. July and August, if you want a vacation over there. Before I went to the States, myself and several other bachelors had been renting half of a house out in the country. There was only one guy left there by this time, so I called him up and he met us at the airport and picked us up, and we went back there. So Sue and I shared this half house with the other bachelor. And this was a cold house. It had stone floors. The only heat was a gas fire in the living room, and it only heated half of that room. And we kept getting really sick and drowsy, and we finally figured out there was carbon monoxide poisoning from the fire, so we had to get that fixed. The shower and bathroom weren't in the house, they were in an outbuilding. So you put your dressing gown on in the morning and run across 10 or 15 feet of ice and snow to get to the outhouse to shower. There were an older couple living in the upstairs of the house, and they befriended us, and Susan and Doris became good friends, and they spent a lot of time together. And Doris really helped Susan to get used to living in England. Things were so different there. I remember Susan went shopping one Wednesday, and the nearest shops were, 5 miles away? And it was down a steep hill to get to the town. So she walked all the way down to the town, and the stores were all closed because it was market day and everybody shut the stores to go to the market. The house we were living in belonged to the Crown, i.e. the Queen of England. It was a Crown property. And the one advantage is it was very, very close to the Windsor Great Park associated with Windsor Castle. So whenever we had spare time and the weather was nice, we'd go over there and go for a walk in the park. That was really pleasant. Our walk with God continued. We needed to find a church. Everything was so different than it had been in America. Each Sunday we'd try out a different church in the area. So many denominations, but so little life. Church was tradition. There was no teaching, no encouragement. It didn't seem to matter what the sign outside the building said. The congregations were dead, or maybe just asleep. Laurie and Lucy bought a house near where we were working, so Sue and I rented a room from them because it made life much more convenient. There were shops within close walking distance, and since he had a car and I had a car, we could share transport to work a lot of the time and leave one for the girls at home. Also at that time we found a Baptist church, and the minister and his wife were young. In fact, this was his first ministry after theological seminary. So we started going there. Unfortunately, the congregation was tradition bound. They weren't too keen on this new young man. After all, he started introducing choruses and guitars to go along with the hymns and the organ. Midweek Bible studies. He even wanted to take the front pews out of the church so we could gather in front of the altar for communion. Anyway, more and more young people started joining this congregation, and we were starting to get quite excited. So the people that were the original congregants decided they needed to replace him. They found themselves an older man who was traditional and would do what they wanted. So he left the church. Fortunately, he had his own house. He wasn't living in church housing. So we started a home church. And all the young people left, and we started meeting at his place. So this was 1974 now. By that summer, Susan and I had bought a house in a town called Hayes, which was 4 or 5 miles away from where the minister and where Laurie and Lucy were living. And once we were in a house church, we started doing more studying, meeting together with other house groups for joint events, going up to London, listening to evangelists, and really getting excited about Christianity and serving the Lord and learning what we could. So that went on for a few years, and then in 1979 I changed jobs. I left the Civil Aviation Authority where I fixed computers for air traffic control, went to a little private company. There were about 20 employees, most of whom worked at the British Airways Reservation Centre in central London, and that's where I was assigned to work. So I went from controlling the aircraft to filling the aircraft. And I was up there for a few months. And now this is where I knew that God had a sense of humour. A message came through that an opportunity for a job in Amsterdam had occurred to the company, and anyone who was interested should contact the head office for more details. And I thought, hey, what harm can it do? I'll give them a call. The next thing I know, I have an envelope with a ticket to Amsterdam in it. Woo! Anyway, this was for KLM, the Dutch airline, and they had 6 computer systems in their building. 2 of them were very old, very unreliable, always breaking down. They wanted our company to keep these 2 old computers running. They gave us a 6-month trial period to see if we were up to the job. And on that, they would base the decision whether or not we got any more work in their building. All the new stuff that was reliable was maintained by the manufacturers. The company didn't want Susan or our daughter to come over with me because they said, I needed to be dedicated to the job 24/7. A lot of stuff I'd never even seen before, and I had to be able to fix it. So I had a lot of learning to do. So we decided that this would be a good time for Susan to take Melissa, who was 3.5 years old then, back to the States for about 3 months and go visit her parents and all her siblings. So she came over January 1. I took her to the airport, put them on the plane, and they flew into PA, and they visited in PA and Ohio, and then out in Seattle, Washington with her brothers. I went back to the house, loaded my car with all the stuff I needed, drove to the car ferry, took the ferry over from Dover to Calais, drove to Amsterdam, or actually Amstelveen, which is a suburb, and moved into the apartment that I had there. The house we had in England, we had one of the young men from our church home group living there, and he had to look after our cat and dog, walk the dog, feed them. He took care of the animals for us while we were away. Now, this was a time when I was not actively engaged with the Lord. I didn't speak any Dutch, so the only people I knew were the ones I worked with in the building, in the computer centre. I was busy learning these new skills. I could have been studying God's Word, but I wasn't. I didn't go backwards in my Christian life, but again, I didn't make any forward progress. Basically, I fell asleep for a while. I just stayed where I was. Susan's trip to the States took her from Pennsylvania to Ohio to Seattle, and it was while she was on this trip that she realised she was pregnant with our second daughter, Evangeline Joy. A lot of you know her. As Susan's trip was coming to the end, she was out in Seattle, Washington with her brother, so I took a vacation, flew out to Seattle, met her there. We toured around the Olympic Peninsula. Wonderful place, really enjoyed it. And then we flew back to England. And from England, by this time, the company had decided she could come over to Holland. After all, I had an apartment with 2 bedrooms in it. So we loaded up the car, and off we went to Holland. Very shortly after this, KLM decided that I'd been doing a pretty decent job, and they wanted us to take over maintenance of the entire computer systems in that building. Like I said, it was 6 big, expensive mainframe computers. So now I didn't just have to maintain the computers, I had to go out and hire staff and come up with a benefits package for the staff if we wanted to hire good people. So, a lot of responsibility there, but I enjoyed it. My 6 months ended up being 5.5 years in Holland. And I never did learn to speak more than please, thank you, good morning. And we knew we were going to be there for more than that 6 months. We decided we needed to find a house and a church. So we found a house nearby which we purchased. And would you believe it? We needed a church where they spoke English. Because no, we're going to a Dutch church, we wouldn't have understood a word they were saying. And we were concerned anyway with tradition. So God led us to the Anglican Church in Amsterdam. They spoke English. And another thing that concerned Sue and I was the lack of unity in the church. There were Anglicans, Methodists, many different types of Baptists, Catholics. It seemed like none of them could agree on anything. And they were always disagreeing, arguing about little things rather than concentrating on the common goal of advancing the kingdom. So as I say, we found this Anglican church, and it turned out to be the best example of unity in the body that we'd ever come across. People came to that congregation from all over the world. The common fact, they could speak English. They put aside their differences, they worshipped, and they worked and they learned together. We had people there from America, obviously, Scottish, Canadians, South Africans, Irish, Swedish, Finnish, German, French, English, and even some Dutch people that went there. Because of the different worship traditions within the Anglican Church, Brian Eaves, the minister there, rotated the type of service he did on a monthly basis. And one Sunday each month, he had a children's service. He explained to Sue and I one evening that he really enjoyed doing the children's service because it enabled him to explain the scriptures in simple, easy to understand terms without appearing to talk down to the people. Brian was an encourager. He and his wife Dottie made everybody feel important and useful in the service of God. He'd invite lay members to lead the Sunday evening services or to be involved in worship or other facets of church life. This is where I was first encouraged, as Brian asked me to lead the Sunday evening service and do the speaking once a month, and Susan would lead the worship for us. The evening services were very relaxed and informal, probably because none of us knew what we were doing. We were learning as we went along. There were also very many talented artists in that congregation. So every June we had gift week in the church, where the church was open from like Friday night through Sunday, and we'd have art and craft, sculpture, all sorts of different things going on for the population to come in and enjoy. We had house groups in various parts of the city, and every week various people in the congregation would invite other people back to their homes for meals. So although we were from all over the world, we really were a family, and we were very close together, and we did a lot of stuff together. The thing is that God gives everybody special gifts and talents, and they need to use them to serve Him as best they can. So after 5 years worshipping in this really great community, we were kind of sad because our term there finished and I had to come back to didn't have to, but we were asked to come back to the States. The company I worked with had now opened up a North America branch, and they needed me in Princeton, New Jersey. So we lived in Lawrenceville because couldn't afford the prices in Princeton. And we were looking for a church again. We found a really good Anglican church. After all, we just left an Anglican church. But that was a long drive away. And then we found a very good Methodist church close by. Sorry guys, I'm only halfway through. So anyway, we found a really good Methodist church. We got involved with them. And then I got moved up here to Kempton, where we're still living. The minister in Kempton was a retired military chaplain. They were about our age. Their kids were the same age as our kids, so we really worked together well with it. Sue and I got really involved in the church, but we couldn't make any progress because, again, tradition limited what we could do. And we weren't PA Dutch, even though Susan had ancestors buried just down the road in one of the churchyards. Again, God changed direction in our lives. We were living up there in Kempton. I was working in the Allentown area. I got called into the company's office in Valley Forge one day, and they said, "We need you to go to California for a couple of months to take over. The manager out there just resigned. We have to find a new man locally. It's either that or we don't need you anymore because there's no vacancies in the Allentown area for you." So I said, "Can I take the rest of the day off? I need to go home and pray about this." And they said, "Fine." So I went home, and Sue and I, we called the minister and several of the prayer warriors from the church, and we spent the rest of that afternoon praying and seeking God's direction. And God said, "Go to California." We didn't know it, but yeah, that was his plan for us. So the original plan from the company was that I would fly out to California. They rented me a car, they rented me a fancy hotel suite to stay in, and then once every 3 weeks I could fly home for a long weekend, and Sue and the rest of the family would stay where they were. So I got on the plane, I get to California, and that very first week I picked up one of those free newspapers, and it said, "Furnished house for short-term lease." And the price was quite reasonable. So I did some math, called the boss back in Valley Forge and said, "Hey, if you rent me this house instead of this hotel suite and fly my wife and kids out to California instead of flying me back home once every 3 weeks, you'll save money." Save money? Sounds good. Make the arrangements. So Sue and the girls and the dog came out to California and joined us. And he took us to all sorts of different churches and groups out there, and we really grew in the Lord. So anyway, we came back. We were still going to the UCC church, but the girls were becoming teenagers, and there was nothing there for them. No youth group. They were getting bored. We knew we had to find a church. So we discovered Faith Evangelical Free down in Trexlertown. They had really good youth groups for different ages. They had multiple ministers working there. We went down there. The minister was great. We had some good teaching. Sue and I joined the chorus. We even discovered singing with this group. I learned to sing. The music minister there got together with 2 other churches from 2 other denominations. Now we had 3 denominations with their choirs and orchestras combined. And we did concerts at 3 different churches and at the State Theatre in Easton. And we filled the place. Talk about an experience. We really loved it. It's while we were there that we heard about the Toronto revival. So Sue and I went up, and it was during one of their meetings that we both got slain in the Spirit. We later left Faith because, well, there was just an awful lot going on down there that we didn't agree with. And we went to a house church over in Bethlehem. And again, we started growing. We were singing in tongues, speaking words over people, and just learning new stuff. But we were still concerned about people of different groups working together. Psalm 133 says, "How wonderful and pleasant it is when brothers live together in harmony." And we are all brothers, regardless of the church we attend or the denomination we follow. If we can't live in harmony with one another, how can we spread the gospel message? People will not take us seriously if they see us fighting among ourselves. We need to be cooperating to bring glory to the kingdom and show that glory to the non-believers. Jesus made this point in John 10:16. "I have other sheep too that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock with one shepherd." Jesus was talking to his Jewish followers and telling them that his message needed to be taken to the Gentile world. The Gentiles and the Jews were going to be merged into one flock and would follow Jesus. Now the Jews and the Gentiles were totally different from each other. For centuries, the Jews had not been allowed to associate with the Gentiles. And for a good long time, Gentiles have been ruling over the Jews and abusing them. And now, here's Jesus telling the Jews that his Father sent him to bear the sins of all mankind to reconcile us to the Father. Ephesians 2, it says in verse 15-16, he made peace between the Jews and the Gentiles by creating in himself one new people from the two groups. Together as one body, Christ reconciled both groups to God by means of his death on the cross, and our hostility towards each other was put to death. A quick search on the internet showed me that there are 91 congregations in Bethlehem. There are 41 in downtown Allentown. If you include the rest of the Lehigh Valley, there are going to be many hundreds of congregations meeting to worship our Lord and serve him. To the best of my knowledge, there are 4 organisations in this area that work across boundaries to try and get churches working together and doing stuff. Even so, these organisations only cover a small fraction of the congregations. But working together is the only way for Christians to advance the kingdom and uphold the values that this country was founded on. Paul expresses this in his letter to the Philippians in chapter 2. Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another and working together with one mind and purpose. Loving one another, working together with one mind and purpose. This will take an attitude change and hard work. Paul tells us what we need to do in verse 3. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look only at your own interests, but take an interest in others too. This is so different from the world's attitude. We have to change the way we think and act. We are too insular, and we go out of our way to stop mixing with groups that think differently to ourselves. We need to go out of our way to encourage others, not criticise them. We can start by keeping an eye out for other churches in our area that have a special event going on, and then show up and support it. By going to prayer meetings with other churches when they have them. Making friends with folks in other churches and just sharing scriptures with them. Susan had gone to the Bible study at Jacob's way back, and she continued going until about 3 years ago when we got the grandkids with us, and it just wasn't possible. She's also participated in their prayer ministry over the years, and in fact just this fall she did a teaching there at their women's retreat. I've been involved with the Summon the Nation group when they do their parades of flags and things like that and bring lots of different churches together. And Sue and I have been involved in a group called the Emmaus community. Has nothing to do with Emmaus down here, but it's based on the Luke scripture. And its purpose is to teach and train lay members of the church to become leaders in their congregations. We talk about one body, but we often limit it to the people we meet every Sunday and worship with on a Sunday. We need to spread it out to all the various church congregations in the area. God says everybody who's given their life to him are part of one body. It doesn't matter where they go. While Sue and I were attending parenting classes for Michael at a not very good group we had to go to, one of the other women came up to us after one of our evening sessions, and she said, "Susan, could you pray for me?" This woman sought Susan out because she could see there was something different about her. And they started having little impromptu Bible studies over the phone because they lived too far apart to meet. But this is the way we can reach out. Ephesians 4:16 says, He, that is God, makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts to grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. As we leave here today, let us meditate on how we, as individuals, can encourage and advance the unity of all believers so that different congregations can teach, train, and encourage each other, so that we can support each other and work together to reach out into the community. And finally, we need to come together in larger groups to praise and worship our Lord on a grand scale. How will you lay aside your differences? What spiritual gifts and talents are you willing to share with others? How are you prepared to bring unity to the believers? Thank you.